I better be careful that I don't fall off the edge here. As you can see, it's an absolutely perfect day at the beach today, and this is my little secret. I often say to friends and family who want to visit Cape Town that the best time of the year to come is now, sort of at the beginning of autumn. We have these unbelievably beautiful, crisp, warm days where the wind isn't blowing, and it's just absolutely beautiful. And the nice thing is, because most of the holiday makers have returned home to where they are, the beaches are relatively open and free, and it's just beautiful to be out here. You can see how magnificent it is out here today. So I'm going to take a little walk along the beach and just have a chance to relax and enjoy the beautiful, beautiful sunshine. So I'm following the example of Casey Neistat, and here I am shooting a little bit of a time lapse on my old iPhone 5. So this phone literally just gets used for time lapses. So I'm very fortunate to have it. So hopefully there'll be a beautiful time lapse with people on the beach that'll make it into the video. So as I mentioned earlier, today is the 3rd of April, and that makes this the first Sunday after Easter. And I've had the privilege over the last couple of weeks to have a chance to visit many different congregations and communities over Holy Week, over the Easter weekend, and then again, of course, today on the first Sunday of Easter to be in church this morning. Now, one of the things that's interesting for me this year that's really struck me is the use of particular language. And we would know as Christians, and particularly as theologians, that language is a very, very powerful thing. It shapes the way in which people give expression to their thoughts, but particularly when it comes to the proclamation of the message through preaching or through teaching, it also shapes the ways in which people think. And one of the concepts that I've really been thinking about this particular Easter is the concept of violence and the cross. And it's been interesting for me to see how many of the people that I've listened to preaching and teaching over the last little while use a very sort of violent expression of the cross. In theology, we would call this the language of empire. Now, if you think about it, the notion of empire, certainly in secular politics and history, is to build a social structure that's built through power and domination. And much of the language that I've heard over Easter has employed that same sort of narrative. The building of the kingdom of God through the power and the victory of the cross. And I've heard phrases like the dominion of the cross, victory over sin and death. And now, of course, elements of this are very true. We find them in the language of the Apostle Paul in the New Testament. And Paul in particular, with his use of the Lordship of Christ as a central metaphor, is understood to be one of the early precursors of the notion of empire in Christian theology, the building of structures of dominance. Now, what makes this difficult for me is that sometimes I think that this particular language, the violent language, the language of power that's used to establish the kingdom, is not in keeping with the character of Christ himself. In particular, the work of John Howard Yoder has influenced me in this regard. He wrote that wonderful book, The Politics of Jesus, in which he speaks about the fact that the person of Christ, if we take his nature seriously, shapes us into a peaceable kingdom. And I've thought about this quite a lot recently. You know, Walter Wink wrote a beautiful series of books on the powers, engaging power in different ways in society. And in that series, he coined a phrase called redemptive violence. And I think that's particularly interesting at this stage of Easter as we think about the cross. The point that he makes is this. For Christians, the notion of violence can never be coupled to redemption. Because how is it possible to save someone or save something through the use of destructive power, through the use of overcoming or overpowering them? Rather, the kind of thing that we need for redemption is what we see in the very nature of the person of Christ. And that's acts of service, acts of humility, and the nature of Christ's love. So the thing that I've been thinking about this year is over Easter is to think, what does it mean for me to be a servant of the peaceable king? Stanley Hauerwas, in his beautiful book called Resident Aliens, deals with this notion. What does it mean to live in a different way from the dominant, power-obsessed structures of the world? What does it mean to live first and foremost as a servant and not as a king? He wrote a beautiful book based on his Gifford lectures. This is Stanley Hauerwas. The book is called With the Grain of the Universe. And in that book, Hauerwas says that the way of Christ, the King of grace, rules the world not from the power of a throne, but from the humility and brokenness of the cross. So my encouragement to you today, remember, it's not a lecture, it's just a thought, is to say, think about what it may mean to live not by power, but through service. To live with the kind of nature that Jesus has, and not to use the language of empire, the secular empire, but to use the language of the kingdom of God, a king of peace who comes to serve the world in love. I don't know what that'll mean for where you are and for where you live, but I have one or two ideas for what it may mean for who I am and where I live. So thanks for sharing with me today on this beautiful, beautiful autumn day here in the Strand in Cape Town in Somerset West. I'm going to take a little walk along the beach now and just enjoy the sunshine. Okay, beach time is over. Time to get back on the bike and head home.